right, good afternoon, everybody. My clock is showing the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and kick this thing off. Welcome to our Ignite session, Shapeshifter, a Power App and PCF showcase. My name is Brendan Colburn. I'm an MTC architect. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Jamie Stento, also an MTC architect. We have an agenda. We're going to go through all sorts of different fun stuff today. We're going to be doing a quick introductions, a quick overview of the scenario. Then we're going to demo technology. Then we're going to recap the things that we saw, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. You can obviously post questions in the chat throughout the process, and Jamie's going to be my right-hand man checking that chat along the way. So yeah, as I said, Brendan Colburn. I'm the MTC architect for the DC Microsoft Technology Center, and Jamie Stento is the Philly MTC architect, both of us specializing in business applications.
Hi, everyone.
So what is this like MTC Microsoft Technology Center? We aren't supposed to say too much, but what I will say is that we are now calling ourselves the hub for innovation with the Microsoft Cloud. And this map behind the graphic here shows that we are a global organization. Every MTC has several architects like Jamie and myself that cover the whole Microsoft stack, and we help our customers move forward with the technology. It's a great gig. So let's get into the story of this thing, Shapeshifter. So at the MTC, we have customers in all the time, and I had, I don't know, like 4 or so different large enterprise customers and federal agencies at the DC Microsoft Technology Center specifying a similar requirement. And that requirement was a dynamic questionnaire. They have this scenario where they have a lot of different forms, and they have the schema of the form, fields that will react to other fields for different forms built out in a data structure. And they were like, hey, Brendan, how can we dynamically render that stuff from my data structure into a Power App? And there were ways that I would show them at the time that you could do it, but it wasn't like the most elegant solution. So I built this thing called Shapeshifter that I think is a more elegant solution to dynamically rendering controls in a Canvas app, and I suppose also in a model-driven app scenario. The concepts that we'll be covering today, and we have a nice little graphic here too, that we're going to be crawling, walking, running, and then maybe a little bit of a joke here, then we'll be flying away. Really, the concepts at play will be Power Apps component framework, command line interfaces, PowerFX, some new stuff in PowerFX really is the key point, GitHub code spaces, containers and Docker, GitHub Copilot, dynamically rendering controls, React, and TypeScript. And just an important thing to call out here and why we put the graphic on here, you don't need all of this stuff to get started with Power Apps component framework and start building out your code components. This is a art of the possible demonstration of just like how cool and how advanced this stuff can get. And with that, I'm going to start demonstrating technology. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get to it. All right, is my screen sharing, Jamie and crew?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. So this is the Shapeshifter test Canvas app. It is a test harness that I kind of built out to showcase the capabilities of the Shapeshifter control. So this Canvas app has a Shapeshifter embedded on the right-hand side here. You'll see it's a Shapeshifter control. And one of the key components of the Shapeshifter control is that it has some parameters that it takes. And because you give certain values for the parameters, it will dynamically render itself. So, I give it a label, a control type, the options for like our more advanced controls like drop downs, and a default value, and it'll take care of the rest. So I have this on the right-hand side. There are, as I said, some advanced PowerFX capabilities that I have embedded throughout all of this. One thing that's not advanced, but I just used it to get started, is I used the tutorial screen template to build this out originally, and that just kind of like helped me have like an easy way to set up a tutorial with this gallery at the bottom and some of this other functionality. But then one thing that I added, which is somewhat new with PowerFX, is string formatting. So nowadays, in the past, you would do a string and then you do an and sign and then you do another string. Now you can do a $sign, and then you can embed your values right in there with then having a curly bracket. This is not new to other programming languages per se, but now you can do it in PowerFX. Another new capability that I'm leveraging here is index, which allows you to look at a gallery, provide an integer value, and then retrieve the value based off of that integer value. So it's a pretty cool capability. Before, I think it was quite a bit more difficult to do this. So what are we looking at? We have over here a label that I'm populating with a JSON version of the sample fields collection. And the way that that's working, if we look at the on visible of the tutorial screen, I go ahead and I use the JSON method to populate some context variables on the screen. Another thing that maybe isn't super new, but maybe not everyone on the line is aware of, is the concurrent function that allows you to run several different methods at once in a PowerFX formula. This is a performance saving measure because otherwise each one of these would happen synchronously. Now they're happening asynchronously, which helps the screen load faster. So when I play this thing, you'll see that I have a collection, and the first item in the collection is a text field with a default value of Brendan and a label of what's your name. And because those values are in the schema, Shapeshifter renders itself. It says, what's your name, Brendan, and it's a text field. I could change this to be James, and I have it dynamically changing on the fly. So like it's responsive. Now you'll see in our collection and rendered out into JSON, we have Jamie Stento. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next screen here. And for those who like guessing, you can guess real quick what it might be. But now I'll actually show you what it is. So it is a date field with my birthday in there. So all 100, however many 100 people on the line here, if you want to send me your Chili's gift cards, I guess you don't have my address, which is good. But there you have it, a date field. It's also, I would say, maybe a little bit better styled of a date field than the out-of-the-box Canvas app date field. It's bringing in Fluent UI, which is nice. I can make my changes and it updates accordingly. I can go through the rest of this Power App and you'll see, I have a slider control and Spinal Tap reference. We're bringing this thing to 11. I have a drop down. This is Shapeshifter contributors. There's Brendan and nobody else yet. I'm looking forward to maybe this changing after Ignite. A radio button list that I implemented as well. And on the last screen, this is where things get a little bit interesting. And this is where it gets closer to the dynamic questionnaire scenario. So on all of the previous screens, it was just one Shapeshifter control, and I was dynamically changing the values by updating the tutorial. But for this example, it's actually a gallery that has a Shapeshifter in it. And just, however many records you put in the gallery and the collection associated with the gallery, it will render Shapeshifter each time accordingly. So not only like dynamic rendering for a control, but dynamic rendering in kind of like a looping format. So you'll see here, I can remove the item. Now I have an empty array. I can add an item back. There it is back. I can add a more advanced item like dropdown, and I've opened up the opportunity to then also have a ability to add options. So I can click on add options, and I created just a simple schema here where it's drop-down options, and then I can say, well, instead of nobody else yet, I'll say that somebody from Ignite will be my next collaborator. I can say okay. And I can enter in a default value of 2. It had a key value pairing. And I can say future contributors. Now, when I add this control, you'll see the default value is somebody from Ignite. I have those options all laid out there. And when I open this thing up, I have Brendan and somebody from Ignite as the 2 options. So this doesn't match like one-to-one to the dynamic questionnaire scenario. It's kind of like a hybrid where I have the ability to create my questionnaire and then I can see my questionnaire on the right-hand side. Really, maybe you'd have 2 different apps, and then you'd have another app that would be just reading the data and rendering out a dynamic questionnaire potentially. And that, I believe, is the first part of the demo. So that shows the front end, really. This Shapeshifter control that is embedded into a Canvas app, and based off of dynamic values being populated into it, renders accordingly. Jamie, have you seen any interesting questions in the chat so far?
Not anything yet. I posted one message in the chat with a link to some Fusion development documentation that I think is useful, because the overarching theme here is really around this concept of Fusion development. What Brendan did was do the professional developer side of things, where he created a custom control that then our low-code developers can utilize in their applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I'm going to bring this over to Codeville. So I have a repo up on GitHub. I'll throw it in the chat too, so people can check it out on their own time. And along with my repo, I have this little area here where I can add new GitHub code spaces. I signed up for the capability, and because I did, I'm able to spin up these Dockerized containers. And ultimately, when I do that, I have one already up. It takes somewhere between 1 to 5 minutes. I wanted to kind of keep that abstracted a little bit. I have VS Code rendering in my container. The key things that made this tick, one is there's a Docker file. And in the Docker file, I'm bringing in .NET Core 6.0 image from Microsoft's container registry. And I'm using that to build out a Linux container with that image on top. The other key component here is a dev container.json. This gives us the ability to specify like what extensions I want installed on this VS Code container as it renders. And a thing that I'll be showing in a little bit is GitHub Copilot. which is really cool. I'll show you what it is soon. And I also added some Power Platform extensions, which also automatically added the CLI into this container, which is helpful. And it also has port forwarding in place, which I will show momentarily what that means. Now, this PCF control that I have containerized now, value prop there, I no longer have the operating system interfering, so I can't have any operating system thing. I mean, other than it would kick me off of the team session, but this container would not be affected by it. And it also gives me compute in the cloud. So like, if my laptop started, like, the fans were running too fast, you never know. This is a MacBook, so who knows? That wouldn't affect this scenario either. Now, some of the key things to call out here. So I have shapeshifter.tsx. TSX is a TypeScript React file extension. It allows you to combine TypeScript, which is it's a way of adding strict typing to JavaScript, with React, so that you can import in modules. You can combine your HTML with your JavaScript. You can actually combine your CSS in here also. So it's like one file to rule them all for web development. Now, at the top here, I'm importing in the text field, date picker, slider, dropdown, and choice group from Fluent UI React. This, for people interested, this is Microsoft's underlying, way that we build out a lot of our capabilities, whether it's in the Power Platform, in Office 365, even some of VS Code itself is using Fluent UI. So almost everything that Microsoft is building nowadays, we use a lot of this capability for the skinning and the look and feel. So I'm using that same thing to build out my PCF, so it looks more native and I guess pretty than just a standard PCF without any of this stuff. I then have a switch statement that looks at that control type. If you'll remember, the Shapeshifter has a control type as a parameter right here. And I'm entering in dynamic values there using PowerFX. Now, based off of that, I do a switch statement. I say, hey, if it's a text field, bring me back a React text field. If it's a date field, bring me back a React date picker, slider. I'm specifying all the additional properties for these given components so that it will render out appropriately. Now, what's nice about all this is that I can then use the CLI that I have here. Really, it's a terminal to do npm start watch. And embedded into this capability, not only do I have VS Code, but I also can port forward the PCF test harness into the same space. So this allows me to play around with my PCF control, my Shapeshifter, before I deploy it anywhere. So you'll see that I have a slider, and it goes to 11, which is good. But let's say that I think that it needs to be at least twice as much volume in there. So I could say a max value of 22. And because I did npm start quotes watch, this lights up a capability called React hot reload, which allows me, when I save, it will reload the browser. You'll see a little spinny here. And then now, on the fly, my dev has been updated in this test harness, so I can see what it looks like if I have a value of 22 that I want to have for my sliders. You'll see I can go through all the different properties, and I can change them. So, I want this to be a text field instead. All right, this is what your control looks like as a text field. You can do different form factors too within the test harness. So I could say, oh, I want this to be 300 by 300, for instance. So you get a lot of different options there as far as how you can render out this thing in the test harness. Now, if I, for the time being, I will turn off that session. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show a little bit of what it looks like to start doing GitHub Copilot within this same scenario. So if I say case, quote, and I'll go with a spin button. Now you'll see I get this gray stuff that starts showing up automatically. This is GitHub Copilot. It's automatically saying, hey, is this something that you wanted to do? I'm like, not yet. So I can say EL equals spin button. And then what it'll do is it'll say, oh, this is what I think spin buttons often look like. I can also go to the next option. Next option. So I can scroll through these different AI auto-filled capabilities to ultimately land on, okay, this is the one that I want. This is the one that looks the closest to what I want here. So I'll hit tab. And so this is AI just letting me build out my components on the fly, where classically I'd probably have to go to the documentation. I'd have to look at, oh, here's a spin button. Here's how it's used. Here's how it's normally formed. Maybe that takes me 5 minutes. Maybe it doesn't take me too long. But imagine like having AI cut out, like turn 5 minutes into 30 seconds with every new component that you're adding into here. It has the potential to really be a force multiplier here. So, I'll do that. Then I'll say break. And I'm having a few red squigglies because I need to add this. So that gets rid of one of them. And the other thing, this is actually a feature of TypeScript. So TypeScript is saying that, hey, we don't recognize this value of spin button. So I have a separate TypeScript interface that I'm importing in. It's called Shapeshifter props. And when I look at this guy, we'll see that for the control type, I've specified that it can be either a text field, a date field, a slider, a dropdown, or a choice group. So nowhere in there is spin button. What I can do is I can just say, oh, you know what? I want to add a spin button. And now my red squiggly goes away. One more thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go to the control manifest. And this is where a lot of your component ends up being defined. And in the properties area, I've established that the control type it's an enum, and it allows me to pick from a specified set of options. And what I need to do now is I need to add a new selectable option. So I'll go in here and say value name equals, you'll see it's already starting to give me GitHub Copilot again, but I need to give it a little bit more coaching. I'll say, oh, this is a spin button. And then it says, oh, do you want to use the rest of the format that we see throughout the rest of your, what you have here? I'm like, yes, I do. So that shows how GitHub Copilot, for one, can like scrape through all sorts of public repos in GitHub, but it can also scrape through my existing code and find patterns there too, which is helpful. Now, I've been noticing that every once in a while, my demo doesn't render quite the way that I want it to, but fingers crossed here. If I go ahead and, we're doing it live, so, give me a little bit of credit here. If I say npm start watch, best case scenario, will be that now we have a working spin button that I can see in my test harness. So we'll see in the options that I have available, I now have a spin button as an additional selectable option. Oh, that feels so good. Earlier it wasn't working for me, but now in front of hundreds of people, now it works. That makes me feel great. That makes me feel great. So you'll see GitHub Copilot saved me time. This is something that would have taken longer for me to do otherwise, to bring in a totally new React Fluent UI control. So if I go back to what I have here, I'm going to go ahead and close that Node.js session. And now I'm going to walk through the process of updating a control. So in the manifest, you'll see that I currently have a version of .10. And that is close to the version number that I have in my Fusion demo environment in Power Platform, but not quite. So if we want to upversion a control, we have to upversion it here first. So I will go ahead and change the version to version 22. Now that's been our lucky number so far. Now with version number 22, I can go in, I'll just call out here that we have some cool new capabilities in here also. Namely, this is a virtual control, which means that it uses the platform's version of React and Fluent so that I don't have to bring in those libraries separately. And it makes it so that the PCFs load and are a lot more performant. So if you haven't started doing virtual controls, I recommend that you start. So now I can save this. And as I mentioned before, because I added a couple additional extensions into the container, it allows me to use the Power Apps CLI in this container as well. So if I say PAC, now I'm continuing to be able to do all sorts of cool dev stuff within my container. When I do PAC, it shows me all the different options that I have available, whether it's like admin, authentication, Canvas, portals, PCF, packaging and unpackaging solutions, all sorts of fun stuff. Now, if I say, for instance, pack auth list, it says that I don't have a authentication on this container. That's fair. So I can say pack auth create. And then I need to go through and do the device login here. Did I copy that right? Oh, I missed a letter. F. Next. Yes, I want to go through one MTC. Yes. All right, so now I am connected. And go back. And what I want to do actually is to do pack auth. And I want to create, but I want to, I had this set up in the other container. Really, what you want to do, I have in the other container, or several other containers really. So I can have multiple code spaces up and running at the same time, which is nice. What I wanted to do, if I can get this authenticated on the fly, is I wanted to do